Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure for me to be here again in Korea. And I will say a few words about what's happening in the Middle East and how it affects Israel. And actually, I'll send you some telegrams because, we don't have much time. Maybe we'll elaborate more in the Q&A period. What we see in the Middle East for the past year is not much new. I know that you hear from the news that there is a new Middle East. It's not the first time you hear about new Middle East. I remember in the 90s also there was a new Middle East and still was the same Middle East. So now we see a Middle East in which there was some change. A few dictators went home, and some of them were killed. And but most of the Middle East remained more or less the same. So we have a mix of new regimes and old regimes. And there are three main trends in the Middle East which are not new, but they've been to a great extent emphasized by what's called the Arab Spring, or call it whatever you want. Now it's spring here in Korea, but and it's in the Middle East. Definitely, it's not the spring the West was expecting. So first of all, we see a continuation of the weakening of the Arab states. The Arab states are in deep social, political, economic crisis for years. And actually what we've seen in the last year is a result of this crisis. We've seen rebellions, people going to the streets, protesting their situations, their predicament. And the novelty of the situation is that they are no longer afraid. So we see maybe a new generation of Arabs that are less afraid of the dictators, are willing to risk their lives, and this is of course commendable. But I doubt very much if what we see today will be great democracies. Democracies is more complicated, and so far we've seen in a civil war, fragmentation of a state, the military in Egypt staying in power, and much in the recent election we've seen the Islamists coming to power. All this means that in terms of international relations, those states will continue to be busy with domestic affairs, be it the old elites or the new elites. And as a result of that, they will be less inclined for foreign adventures. They will be less able to develop large national projects like a missile project or a nuclear project. And it is they'll continue to be busy with economy, trying to prevent the situation of starvation from some of their people. Actually, the events in the Middle East have deteriorated to a great extent the economic situation of some of the states. A second trend, again not new, is the strengthening of non-Arab states in the terms of balance of power. The Arab states are being weakened, particularly Egypt, which has been a major state. And instead we see the rise of non-Arab states, particularly three. It's Israel, Turkey, and Iran. Israel is of course a country which has successfully integrated in the globalized economy. It has a prosperous economy. We are doing very well. It built a military machine, a strong military machine, and it is of course a democracy, and it is the power differential between us and our neighbors is actually growing. as a result of our success and their crisis. We see other non-Arab states, Turkey and Iran. They are both large countries, over 70 million, together with Egypt. You know, those are the three main countries, largest countries. But while Egypt lingers into a crisis, Turkey has a good economy, a good military, and unfortunately is distancing itself from the West. Turkey of today is not the one that we've known before, partly because of changes in its strategic environment and partly because of domestic changes. The most important change in its strategic environment is the demise of the Soviet Union. Its main threat disappeared actually in the 90s, and after the 90s it developed ambitions to lead the Middle East, which are partly in some kind of neo-Ottoman tradition, and partly due to the Islamist coloration of the current government that has been ruling Turkey since 2003. And Turkey of today is actually courting with the radical forces in the Middle East. To give you just a few examples, it is the only Western country, NATO country, that invited Ahmadinejad to visit. It is the only country Western countries that voted against the United States at the United Nations Security Council against sanctions. They are not cooperating with the current sanctions. It is the only country that accepted Bashar of Sudan for a visit. And it is a country that sides with Hamas rather than the PA. And as a result of its reorientation of its foreign policy, the relations with Israel have also deteriorated. Iran shares with Turkey this imperial tradition. It also has ambitions to lead the region, particularly since revolution. They want to export their own version of Islamic Shiite Islam. It is a revisionist power. And if it will go nuclear, it will be a game changer in terms of the balance of power in the Middle East. And Iran, of course, is an anti-Western force, which has benefited from the events in the Middle East, because we see Islamic groups being catapulted to power, and this is something they enjoy, they like, just as the Turks. If we see the crisis of today in Syria, Turkey supports radical Sunni elements against Bashar. There is, of course, competition between the two powers, but they cooperate. It's a mixed game. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they compete. A third trend, which is again not new, is perceived, and I emphasize perceived, US weakness in the region. I do not subscribe to the declinist literature of the United States. The United States is there to stay. It's a strong power. It's probably the only real superpower in the world nowadays. But in the Middle East, it is seen as a power that retreats from the region. It leaves, just left Iraq. Obviously, it will leave Afghanistan. And its behavior in the last year was quite problematic. To give you just a few examples, it supported the removal of Mubarak, which was considered a long-time ally of the United States. This was not viewed favorably in the Middle East. Basically, Middle Eastern saw it as a betrayal on part of the United States of an old friend. Similarly, the support for removal of Gaddafi in Libya was quite strange. After all, Gaddafi cooperated with the West, so, gave up its nuclear weapon program, and he was behaving. And the lesson everybody learned in the Middle East is that you should keep your nuclear weapons and don't give it up if the Americans or the Europeans want to disarm you. And I'm not sure this is the best lesson the Americans can can bring to the region. Similarly, there were eyebrows raised when the Americans criticized the Saudis for intervening in Bahrain. After all, Bahrain is the seat of the Fifth Fleet. So we see an American behavior which only reinforces the feeling among foes and friends that America doesn't get it, that doesn't understand regional realities. I'm sure there is something that you share here, or some of you share here, that they do not always realize what's really happening in the region. This is a vacuum in which radical forces can enter. I still have 4 minutes, right? So I'll send you a few bullets about how does this affect Israeli security. First of all, we learned that strategic surprises can happen again and again. I think also that we have a problem with deterrence. Deterrence is not only a function of Israeli military power, but also the perception that our ally, United States, will come to our aid in case of need. And now it's questionable, at least in the region, whether America is a trusted ally. It's basically viewed as a very problematic ally. Also in terms of deterrence, we should be aware that we see new elites coming to power. Those elites have not been socialized yet into the rules of the game. They may miscalculate and make mistakes. And of course, this is something we do not welcome because we prefer stability. In terms of military threats, obviously, because of the Arab weakening, because they are weaker, they can have less an ability to launch a large-scale military war. But at the same time, there is growing potential for terrorist activities because the Arab state loses sovereignty, loses its grip over the state. A clear example is Egypt and Sinai, where as a result of the less of a presence of the state, we see terrorist groups and Sinai becoming an area where there is a highway for smuggling weapons. So actually the weakening of the Arab state allows greater freedom of action to terrorist groups. At the same time, it allows greater access to weapons because some of the national arsenals were actually less defended, less defensible, and we've seen where sensitive technologies coming out of the Libyan arsenal, and they reached the terrorist organization of Hamas in Gaza. Similarly, we are afraid that as a result of the civil war in Syria, we may see some of the chemical weapons falling in the wrong hands. I think also we are concerned that the East Mediterranean could become an Islamist lake. If you take a look at the shores of the East Mediterranean, Tunisia is Islamist, Libya is Islamist, or partly Islamist, Al-Qaeda presence there, it's a civil war, could become a Somalia. Egypt, in the elections, the Islamists were successful, and Sinai is indeed a Somalia. We see Al-Qaeda and other Sunni radical elements in Sinai. Gaza is ruled by Hamas. Israel is not Islamist. Lebanon is ruled by Hezbollah. Syria is an ally, nowadays an ally of Iran. And if there will be a change of regime, it's great chance the radical Sunnis will take power. And further north, it's Turkey with its Islamist inclinations. we may see conflict in the Middle East, in the East Mediterranean, particularly over energy, which was with our large discoveries of gas fields, which are partly Israeli, part Cyprus, and the Turks are in Cyprus. Cyprus was once part of the Ottoman Empire. I don't know if you've read Othello. Othello happened in Cyprus, and so this is a problem. And I'll end with probably the most important strategic issue for us. It's Iran, and the events in the Middle East have actually allowed more time to the Iranians. It has deflected the attention from the nuclear program. Everybody was busy with other things, and having another year, they are closer to the bomb, and we are closer to the time of decision.
I want to speak about the effects of the so-called Arab Spring on United States policy in the Middle East, and more specifically about American-Israeli relations. Despite the perceived decline in American influence and standing, the U.S. is still a key player in the region. And my second point is that the U.S.-Israeli relationship is very strong, and judging by the effects of the Arab Spring, it has already been promoted and further developed. United States and Israel share similar concerns about events in the Middle East. They agree on the goals that the two countries and the West should achieve in the region. There is disagreement about means. I want to apply these two basic arguments on four issues: Arab Spring, Iran, Israeli-Palestinian relations and negotiations, and bilateral relations. First, Arab Spring. Israel has not shared the big enthusiasm in the United States as well as in the West about Arab democracy. And Israel was criticized for not being enthusiastic. How come you're not enthusiastic? Democracy is finally coming to the Middle East. The problem is, and especially Thomas Friedman, Thomas Friedman wrote so enthusiastically about the potential for democracy in the Middle East. Israel and many of our colleagues thought that the basic American and perhaps also European approach to the uprisings in several Arab countries represent wishful thinking more than recognition of realities. The assumption has been that if you have an uprising against dictatorship, on the other side you have democracy. But theory and reality in the Middle East and elsewhere suggest that one type of democracy may be replaced by another dictatorship, perhaps even far worse. You want an example? Iran is the best example. If you read American and European approaches to the removal of the Shah of Iran back in 1978-79, you would see a lot of enthusiasm. End of dictatorship, the beginning of democracy. And the Islamic theocracy in Iran has been far worse than whatever violations of human rights happened under the Shah rule. In addition to being less enthusiastic about the uprisings, there has been a lot of concern in Israel about the future of governments in the Middle East. We were concerned especially about the abuse and exploitation of democratic processes by Islamic movements and parties. In the Middle East, we call it one time, one vote. Because you bring to power Islamists and then they abolish fundamental democratic norms. Nazism in Germany rose to power by perfect democratic processes, elections. And there is a lot of enthusiasm in the West about elections. Elections are equated with democracy. I happen to believe that elections should be the last step, not the first step in the process. The first step should be the establishment of democratic values, institutions, rights, independent judiciary, freedom of the press, a pluralist party system. When you have elections like those held in Indonesia, in Egypt, it's obvious that the Islamists are going to win them because they are the only organized parties. So in Egypt, like 70% Islamists. Two groups, one is worse than the other. So there's much concern about it, and the Islamic governments have not been moderate. If at all, they went in the other direction. So if you look at Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, these are not partners for peace. These are forces of extremism, radicalism, and terrorism. Second problem is Iran. Here there is complete agreement between Israel, the United States, and Europe that nuclear Iran represents a major threat to peace not only in the Middle East but also in the entire world. So nuclear Iran is not just Israel's business. Yes, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said that Israel should not exist and should be removed from the map. And if, this combination of Islamic extremism and nuclear weapons is very dangerous. Iran is a crazy state, as much as North Korea. There's a lot of collaboration between North Korea and Iran. Also, Israel is concerned about Iran using nuclear weapons to dominate the entire Middle East, to threaten the Gulf, rich oil countries. Nuclear Iran could undermine whatever regimes exist in the Middle East, and they are publicly saying so. We want the entire Middle East to become Islamic, like us. So this has, these things have to be taken seriously. Also, if Iran becomes nuclear, then this is going to completely destroy non-proliferation regimes, not only in the Middle East, but elsewhere. Everybody in the Middle East will attempt to acquire nuclear weapons if Iran does. Saudi Arabia, maybe Turkey, Egypt, everybody will rush to acquire nuclear weapons. So there's a real danger here of a nuclear Iran completely undermining the entire region. Just think about the instability that the Arab uprisings have created, and Iran wants to go right in this period of transition from autocracy to democracy, and they have good allies, the Islamists. Yes, Sunni Islamists and Shiite Islamists. We have seen that Hamas in Gaza, Sunni Palestinians, have been collaborating with Shiite Iran now for a few years now. Very close strategic cooperation. So the fact that one is Shiite and the other one is Sunni has not prevented this close cooperation. So Iran must be stopped. And there has been some disagreements between the United States and Israel about the pace of Iranians' nuclear program and about the means to contain Iran. Right now, the United States wants harsher sanctions. Russia and China oppose it. So it remains to be seen. And it seems that a military option should be seriously considered. Israel considers it. The United States considers it. And it might, well, the choice, this is not the choice we want to be in. either military action or nuclear Iran. You don't want to be in a position like that. But we may reach this kind of a position. And if you get to this position, I think that nuclear Iran is worse than military action. But I think that the United States should be responsible for that, not Israel. Third issue is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Now, if anything, the Arab uprisings have shown that the place given to the Israeli-Palestinian issue in the media, in the United Nations, where every day you have another resolution against Israel, in European and American discourses, has been completely blown out of proportion. For many years, we have been told the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the source of all troubles in the Middle East. If you just resolve this conflict, everything, the Middle East will become the Garden of Eden. This has been always false. Because what the Islamic Revolution in Iran back in 78, 79 had to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. What the Iran-Iraq war, 8 years, hundreds of thousands of casualties, had to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. And what the Arab uprisings have to do with the the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Nothing. Nothing. But from the beginning of the Obama administration, the emphasis was still on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Obama wanted Israeli-Palestinian negotiations to resume. He presented himself preconditions. The Palestinians obviously adopted the preconditions. Nothing happened. Huge mistake, which Obama himself admitted. Now, the United States is a key player because the level of mistrust between Israel and the Palestinians is very high. If you have so much mistrust, you need a credible and effective mediator. And Obama did not deliver on that. It seems that the Palestinians are not interested in resolution. They're not interested. Partly because they have to make concessions. They have to make concessions. They don't want to make the necessary concessions. I've studied Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. Usually you start somewhere here, right? Two sides, and you go like this. With the Palestinians, it goes like this. We make a concession, they go like this. You make another concession, they go like this. You can never meet. You can never meet. Because the maximum that Israel is ready to provide, to offer, the maximum that Israel is prepared to provide without endangering its national security does not meet the minimum demands of the Palestinians. Now, the uprisings have produced mixed results. On the one hand, Hamas, the Islamic terrorist organization controlling Gaza, is losing its base in Syria because of the events in Syria. So Hamas leadership abroad, this is the name, Hamas leadership abroad is looking for another place from which to direct operations in Gaza as well as abroad. On the other hand, we see negotiations between Hamas and Fatah, those in control of the West Bank and of the Palestinian Authority. They made an agreement, a reconciliation agreement, but these agreements worth nothing. They signed an agreement, they have no intention of fulfilling the agreement anyway. And they did it because they wanted to, Hamas wanted to support the Palestinian Authority step taken in the United Nations to get approval for a Palestinian state. They want a state without making the concessions from Israel, to Israel. They want a state without reciprocating with concessions. And then there's another dimension. The border between Gaza and Egypt is now broken, it's open broken, and there is some collaboration based on religion between Hamas and the Islamic Brotherhood. The Islamists are going to rule Egypt, so this represents some danger to Israel. The last issue, U.S.-Israel relations. So as I said earlier, the uprisings have demonstrated again that Israel is the most reliable and strongest ally of the United States in the region, maybe in the world. Even President Obama, who had some disagreements about Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu, declared several times, Israel is our closest ally. When he adds that our relations with Israel are unshakable and unbreakable, I'm a little bit worried. Because if this is the case, you don't have to state it so many times. Nonetheless, Israel and the United States collaborate on strategically, militarily, and politically in the region. And we can see it in, for example, if we look at the military dimension, we see joint development of weapons, some of which are needed here, missile defense systems of all kinds against North Korea. Israel helps to improve weapons. There are all kinds of exercises that Israel does with the United States. One that was scheduled for April has now been canceled because the United States does not want to be seen as perhaps preparing an attack, a joint Israeli-American attack on Iran. Israel and the United States share information and intelligence about terrorism and radical Islam. So if you read in the papers about the disagreements and tension, up to a point, the basic foundation is strong. The basic U.S.-Israeli relationship is highly supported, is strongly supported by Congress, which reflects American public opinion. I've just completed the study of U.S. public opinion towards Israel and the Middle East from 2001 to 2011. 2/3 of the American public supports Israel, supports Israeli policies. Incidentally, 2/3 of Americans support American attack on Iran if everything else fails. The Palestinians receive very low sympathy in America, like 4 or 5% really support them. And so Congress reflects American public opinion, not Jewish opinion. Yeah, there's strong Jewish support for Israel. There is much stronger Christian support for Israel. Evangelical Christians. But even ordinary Americans support Israel, and I think that this support has been strengthened after 9/11 because the ordinary citizen feels that Israel and the United States face the same challenges, Islamic radicalism, face terrorism, Islamic terrorism, and have to use similar means to deal with these threats. So finally, I want to argue that Arab uprisings, Iran's quest for nuclear weapons, have inspired the appearance of two rival alliances, regional and global. On the one side, you have the bad guys, which include Iran, Syria, Hamas, Hezbollah, North Korea, China, and Russia. On the other side, you have basically the West, the good guys, Israel, United States, moderate Arab countries. And so today we have to understand that we have a major battle with religious underpinnings, cultural and religious sources and that the bad guys should better cooperate to defeat, the good guys should better cooperate in order to defeat the bad guys. Thank you.
When I talk about the Middle East, I'm talking about what I call the greater Middle East. What's the definition of the Middle East is something which you can read in the book. Is Turkey in, is Turkey out? It starts in the Atlantic Ocean, starts in Libya. For this presentation, my definition, it's my own definition, I take full responsibility. It's from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Indus River. That is from Morocco to Pakistan, and from the Mediterranean to the Sudan. This is more or less a uniform region, unified with shared religion, shared civilization, and it is about twice as large as the United States, with twice as many people. You can see the figures here, which I've collected about last year. So today is a little more people here, a little more, but still it's about twice, and contains about 50% of oil reserves of the world. So it's one of the key regions of the globe, of the planet Earth. If you look at the map of the greater Middle East, just map out where there are missiles and nuclear programs. I don't want to go one by one. You just see how the map is dotted. Everyone who is to count has missiles, and many has or has had nuclear program. Amazingly, 5 nuclear programs. We are all hearing about Iran, but there are 5 nuclear programs. Some of them don't exist anymore because there was some rollback in the last 10 years, 20 years. There was some rollback in Libya. There was a forced rollback in Iraq, actually twice a forced rollback in Iraq. There was a forced rollback in Syria that we were responsible for, the nuclear program. Not entirely sure that it's dead, but it seems to be dead now. Some missile program was also cancelled by agreement or by force. And today, if you compare the situations, at the maximum confirmed suspected missile programs, there were 11. There were 15 countries when I count the Gulf states as one country, because there are so many of them. So I bunch them together, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, all of them as one. There are 14 others, but I didn't count here 2 entities, non-government entities, which is Hezbollah, is a semi-state, state within a state, and Hamas, which is actually a state, although it's not considered a state. So 17 entities. Out of these 17 entities, 15 have missiles of all kinds. This is an amazing number. And I won't go into the classification here, short-range ballistic missile, but you see that there are a lot of programs. Confirmed today, we have much less, especially the nuclear programs went down from 5 to 2. It's interesting to see how the rollback was achieved. In cases of elimination by force, one missile program, one case of overall missile program was cancelled by force, and that's in Iraq, and 2 nuclear programs, one in Iraq and one in Syria. And by our consent was Libya. Libya devolved itself from missiles, not all missiles, but long-range missiles, and its nuclear program. And I think that Professor Inbar mentioned what's the political consequences of the fact that the West, struck me also as a very strange lesson to the rest of the world of hitting Gaddafi after he gave up his nuclear and missile programs. What kind of lesson is it to the rest of the world? Well, that were the good news, but there is a bad news, because to balance the rollback of missile and nuclear programs, there was the rise of self-capacity. What is in green now is countries and programs that have the capability, the in-house capability, which grew in the last decade in several countries. In Syria, Syria is very opaque about its missile and programs. It hardly shows any picture. It doesn't brag. No parades. You don't see pictures of them. But Syria has a serious missile program with a serious capability that they build on their own. Now they can develop their own missiles. Iran, of course, is known. You see all the parades in the streets of Tehran. 2 parades a year, one of the army and one of the armed revolutionary guards. There are actually 2 military forces, completely equal. They have 2 air forces, 2 navies, 2 ground forces, and each one of them has a yearly parade. And they love those parades, and they show those missiles in the parades, and they test them. And of course, Pakistan. and Pakistan is doing its own missiles, its own factories. If you look at the history of missile proliferation, I won't go every line here. In 1963, that's half a century ago, it all started. Egypt initiated the missile program in 1963, unbelievable. The Second World War was still warm, and they recruited some technicians that used to be in Germany from France and started their own missile. This was discontinued. The next important step was in 1970s, where most of the Arab countries were acquiring weapons from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union supplied them with Scuds. Scuds for the Soviet Union was conventional weapon. It was like tanks, like aircraft. They gave them Scud missile, and the Scud arsenal started at that time. The next most important, significant event, too little advertised, was that in 1976, Egypt, behind the back of the Soviets, sent some Scud bees to North Korea to be copied. Now, whether they were copied by the North Korean, or maybe the North Korean had some help from Russian industry, this is still in debate. But the fact is that this apparently started the North Korean missile industry, and the North Korean acquired some capability, and from that they went to a longer Scud called the Scud-C. They call it Hwasong 6, and then they increased it by about 50% and called it Nodong. So this was the beginning of the capability of North Korea, and I will skip all the rest of them just to show you what kind of advance happened. But that in 2008, Iran surprised everyone by unveiling quantum leap in capability of solid propellant ballistic missile, long-range ballistic missile, two-stage, which is not in North Korea. And in 2009, Iran orbited its own satellite by its own satellite launcher. So from nothing in 1963, you see an Islamic State of Iran capable to orbit its own missile. This is quite a quantum leap in 2 generations of capability. What is the motivation? There are 2 motivations in my mind. In symmetric war, missiles, non-nuclear, non-chemical, conventional missiles are good, cheap strike weapons. So you see many countries giving up air power, like the Iranians, and this is from the parade 8 months ago. Above Tehran, you see 200 planes flying. 50% of them are American planes from before the revolution. Grumman F-14s, Navy Tomcats, and McDonnell F-4s, Phantoms. And the Russian-made aircraft, MiG-29s, that they purchased in the beginning of the 90s. Nothing new. They don't put money in that, but on the ground, you see brand new missiles and new types. So all the money goes there. It's not that the Iranians don't have money to buy new combat aircraft. They've got as much money as you want. They could buy Chinese J-20s, or from the Russians would love to sell them Sukhoi 27s and the advanced version Sukhoi 35s. No, but they choose to make missiles, not aircraft. Same thing with the Syrians. Syrians were very opaque about that, but last year they showed some of the aircraft in the air. Again, you see museum piece, Sukhoi 22. I think it's the only country that still operates. There might be something in Central America. And again, the old Sukhoi 24, MiG-29s, again, hailing from the 90s, nothing new. But you see on missiles, they have brand new missiles that they make on their own, they're manufacturing them. So this is by choice. It's not a default, it's choice to invest in missile strike power and so on. And in some of it you see, I think, in your part of the world. There's not much modernization as much as I know of North Korean Air Force. But they are making missiles, I think hundreds of Nodongs already, and investing in more and more in the new generation of ballistic missiles. Part of it has to do with asymmetric war. This is a picture of our city of Haifa in 2006. Our 3rd largest city and the largest harbor in Israel, and the attack of Grad rockets, 120 meters from the Lebanese border. Those are the long-range Grads. The usual Grad is 20 kilometers. This is a new version where they took out the old propellant, they put new propellant, modern propellant. Nothing changed in the rest of the missile, and the range goes from 20 kilometers to 43 kilometers. And the distance from the Lebanese border to this attack here is the distance from the demilitarized zone to downtown Seoul. So asymmetric war too. The role of North Korea is decisive here. North Korea is not the only supplier. Russia, both as Soviet Union and today as Russia, China, is a supplier, but North Korea is the major supplier, both of missiles and of technologies. I charted here all the countries that I know of from open literature that to which missile technology was marketed, not necessarily sold from North Korea, but it includes Iraq, which negotiated no dongs, and Saudi Arabia was offered no dong and rejected it, but all the rest of them bought it, including, believe it or not, United Arab Emirates bought some Scud-Bs, Hwasong 5 from North Korea, but Americans were very unhappy about it, and they complained about the quality, so they are stored there. Now, I don't know what happened to them. But Syria bought both missiles and capability manufacturing lines for Scud-Cs, and then a special design for them, Scud-D. Iran, of course, started all its inner capability with the North Korean production lines. Pakistan from two sources, China on one side, North Korea from the other side, solid propellant from China, liquid propellant from Pakistan, from North Korea. Egypt, we have talked already how Egypt started the whole thing, and then bought Scud-Bs and Scud-Cs from Libya. They negotiated for no dongs, but Americans said no, and they stopped. Libya, Scud-Bs, and there was a special program of probably a Scud-D, 800 kilometers, that was stopped. Even Yemen. Who heard about Yemen? It's a God-forsaken country that you hardly hear about. And they bought Scuds from from North Korea, and even used them in war. There was a civil war there, and Scuds were fired between South Yemen to North Yemen in 1994 and killed people in the Sana. 6 types of missile marketed to about 9 nations, and that's what we know of. Now, in the black market, I know, and this is verbal information, you don't find in it, 2 cases of black market Scuds from North Korea sold to private collectors in the United States. Private collectors. One of them was caught in the harbor, in the ship in San Diego, and the other one was already on American soil in a ranch that belonged to someone of a crazy, you know, there are crazy Americans that collect arms. A collector of arms. He had his own private Scud from black market from North Korea. That happens about 10 years ago. I heard it verbally, and the American official who told me this story refused, of course, to corroborate it in writing. So actually they were selling in the black market, they were selling in the open market, and they were selling anybody who wants to buy. I'm sure that if South Korea wanted to buy some North Korean missile, they would sell for good money, they would sell them too. North Korea in the Middle East, that you see both in Pyongyang in the Middle East, the SS-21 is a small, very capable, short-range, 120 kilometers, Soviet design from the Soviet time, still operational with Russia, used recently in Georgia War in 2008. Again, Chinese copy, reverse engineering, Syrians had it, sent it to North Korea. North Korea emulated it. It's now in the Pyongyang. Every time there is a parade, you see them, it's called KN2. In Syria is SS-21, you see one taking off a month and a half ago. The Hwasong 6, Scud-C, which is a North Korean design, it's not a Soviet design, and you see exactly the same missile. This is the same launcher, same missile, in a static display in Tehran. The Nodong, this is the more advanced version. Here is the same missile in Tehran. This is in Pyongyang in October 2010. Here it is in Tehran. Exactly same missile, different launcher. And exactly the same missile with slightly more, less advanced feature in Pakistan called Gauri. And then the last but not least, the most important one is Musudan. We don't know the name of that. Musudan is the name of a place, not necessarily the name of a missile. It was first displayed. We heard about it since 2003. It was suspected that the North Koreans managed to get hold of old Soviet submarine launched ballistic missiles. The SSN-6 in the West, in Russia, it's called Rocket 27. And somehow, which to me is amazing, lengthened it and turned into a land-based missile. So the rumors were there. I could hardly believe it, but here are the pictures. This is the missile in Pyongyang, October 2010. We know for sure that the Iranians, they sold it to Iran. 18 units like that were sold to Iran. But we don't see a picture of this in Iran yet. Our chief of intelligence stated that officially, that they have it, and Americans also agree that they have it, Germans also, German intelligence. The Iranians, this is the only case where the Iranians deny that they have this missile. Why? Because the range is probably up to 3,500 kilometers. It wouldn't make sense otherwise, because North Korea can cover your country with the Hwasong-6. They can cover Japan with the Nodong. The next target seems Guam. Guam is 3,500 kilometers away. And if you take this missile, in the Soviet version, it was 2,500 kilometers. They lengthened it, and you make the calculation, it comes to 3,500 kilometers with the same payload. So for the Iranians to admit that they have a missile like that means that this is not against Israel. This is against Europe. That's why probably they don't admit, but eventually it will appear there. But there is a new development now, and since the last 3 or 4 years, we see more and more missiles in Iran that we don't see in North Korea. These are new design, more advanced than anything that North Korea shows. This is an anti-ship ballistic missile, like the Chinese are doing, but short range. And this is, again, much more advanced, solid propellant with guidance and a seeking sensor here that can track moving targets. This is a Hwasong-6, but more advanced version without the winglets, with brand new guidance system and increased range probably by 200 kilometers. This is, as I say, the quantum leap forward. 2-stage, solid propellant. There is no missile like that in China. There is no missile like that in North Korea. This is an original design. And of course, a space launcher, while the North Koreans, your neighbors, twice failed to put a satellite in space, the Korean had 3 launches, out of which 2 were successful. They were Iranian-made satellites put in orbit by Iranian-made and designed launcher, which is lower stage is the Nodong, but the upper stage is a new design, very clever design. I looked at the picture and I take my hat off. Very, very clever design. So we see a trend here that Iran seems to be more advanced than North Korea. And when I'm saying that to you, is because until recently we looked at what's happening in your area because we knew it was coming our way. Now I think you should see what's happening in our area because it may come your way. The implication of this heavily arming missile is now spilling over from our region to adjacent region. North Korean-made missiles are now threatening, or designed missiles are threatening India, and because of that, India is developing a 2-layer missile defense system. Iranian missiles, like this BM-25, are going to threaten Europe, and because of that, the Europeans, NATO, agreed to adopt the American phased adaptive approach system as a European system, and this is a decision of the Lisbon summit in October 2010, which is causing quite an aggravation with the relation in Russia. The Russians are very unhappy about it, and in fact, they threaten now to target their own missiles against Western Europe, and actually the whole policy of reset, of President Obama, reset with Russia, is now on the rocks because of the threat of North Korean-made missiles from Iran to Europe. On Israel, we have a threat from all those radical countries, but now, after the discussion of Professor Gilboa and Professor Inbar, I think that we have to worry about Egypt too. Egypt may radicalize. Up to now, they have missiles, but they never brandish them, they never threaten with them, they never show them. Now with the new regime that could be more radical, this could be also a threat. The threat to Israel is like the threat to South Korea. Every inch of the country is covered. There is no place to go, and I don't want to elaborate about it, but I warn you, there's another trend this is going here, I didn't have time to go. The missiles are becoming more accurate because the modern technology, like the iPad that you see here, is trickling down to military engineering, and it's become cheaper and cheaper to make accurate missiles. And the accuracy turns a missile from non-nuclear missile, from a terror weapon into a military weapon. With better accuracy, you can hit military, you can hinder military operation, you can hit military installations, you can cripple infrastructures like nuclear power plants, and of course cause civilian losses to civilian population. I don't want to go over the summary, but one point. The recent upheavals in the Middle East has the tendency or the prediction to increase the missile threats inside the Middle East and from the Middle East on two routes. One is the radicalization of governments. Egypt is an example. In a country which was moderate, had missiles for self-defense or self-aggrandization, could now acquire more missiles because it radicalized its policy. And the missile will be expression of its new policy. Another route was pointed out already by Professor Gilboa and Professor Inbar, the fact that countries lose control over the missile arsenal. Syria was mentioned, but Syria is still, the regime is under controlling its missile very strictly, but Yemen, which has missiles, is losing control. And those missiles may appear with other governments or at the hand of terrorists. The case of Libya was already mentioned. We see Libyan equipment already in Gaza in our doorstep. So this is the second route. One route is radicalization. The second route is loss of control on existing missile arsenals. And with this unhappy note, I'd like to conclude.